I don't linger for campfire yarns, but hear this. A wagon scarred by 3 brass taps, a girl gasping, "Don't touch me," and a rancher who wagers stone and mercy against a night of fire. When the green flare rips the sky and wolf wax names the law, you'll stay to the last breath. The north wind came like a rasp, dry and hard, scraping the cheeks raw. Eli Hart leaned into the drag. The sled runners hissed over crusted snow, sacks of salt thumping in time with his boots. His bay gelding tossed a steam of breath that blew to tatters and vanished. Out here the air smelled of iron and old leather. Every sound carried the creak of harness, the whisper of snow grains rolling under the crust. He saw the wreck when the wind shifted. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. An overturned freight wagon lay half in a drift. One wheel snapped, the tongue skewed like a broken spear. Boards had skittered wide and froze where they landed. A dark trail scored the snow where the wreck had been dragged a short piece, then quit. He reined up. The horse blew once, uneasy. A small shape huddled against the shattered wheel. Rough gray wool swallowed it whole, a scarf pulled tight over the head and down the face. Rope cleaned the skin from both wrists. A haze of dried blood burned black in the cold. The shape quivered when Eli stepped down. "Don't touch me!" The voice came thin and raw, a wild thing cornered down. Don't touch me." "I won't," he said, low. He let his knife fall into the snow where she could see it, hilt away from his hand. "Easy now, miss. I'm not here to harm you." She drew breath in little saw teeth. The scarf twitched. Eli squatted slow. He kept his hands where she could track them. He slid 2 fingers under the bottom edge of the wool and lifted an inch, not skin to skin, just enough to trade her stale air for the clean cold. "There," he said steady, "get you a lungful." She did and coughed dry. The cough wrung the whole small body. The horse stamped. Somewhere a sheet of ice cracked on the creek and rang like a struck bell. "I'll cut the rope," Eli told her, voice of an old ranch hand settling a spooked colt. "Not going to lay a hand on you." He pinched the knife up by the spine, kept the blade out and away. One stroke at the outer twist, another under the knot. The rope sighed apart. Her hands staggered free as if they did not quite belong to her. He slid the knife back into the snow. No sudden moves. "Water," he said, and brought the canteen up slow. "You hold it if you can." Fingers shook, then found the tin. She drank too fast. The first spill cut a clean track down the grime on her chin. Then she dragged back, careful now. The scarf had slipped enough for him to see a mouth split at the corners, wind cracked and white with salt. He turned his eyes aside. Folks deserved their dignity. "Name?" he asked after a spell. Her voice was bigger with the water in it, but still thin. "Maggie?" "Maggie Hale." He nodded. Names steadied things. Names were stakes in the ground where the wind couldn't blow you clean away. "Eli Hart," he said, "from Windacre, down the draw." He gestured with his chin towards the wreck. "This your outfit?" She shook once. "No, they—" The word snapped and dragged. "They took it." "3 of 'em?" he asked, eyes moving without his head. The snow was a ledger, if a man cared to read. Her scarf bobbed. "3." Eli stood. The world had gone quiet the way it gets before a front. He walked a slow circle of her, boots whispering. The snow told him what he needed. 3 sets of shod hoof prints, sharp as stamps, aimed for the Sweetwater ice, heel marks where men had jumped down, long scuffs where something heavy had been pulled. He found a butt of cheap tobacco near the wagon tongue, paper rough and yellowed, the kind sold out of a pickle jar on a counter that smelled like kerosene. A faint stain of smoke clung to the wreckwood, old but not too old. He stepped back to the wheel and looked close at the rail, at a strip where the frost was melted in 3 tiny ovals. He ran his glove there and felt 3 shallow dents close together, neat as counting. He knew the sound in his head as soon as he touched them. Tap, 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 brass on wood, a habit, a tell. He set his palm flat to the cold and let the wind talk around him. 3 riders with the same long seat, mean enough to leave a girl tied in open weather, sure of themselves to mark their rhythm on the broken wagon, like signing a bill of sale. "Miss Hale," he said, keeping his voice a blanket, "I'm going to get you up out of this and onto my sled. No hurry, we'll do it your way." Her breath came quicker. Don't touch." "I won't," he said again. "You lean. I'll keep the leather tight." He looped a lead strap over the sled's backboard and drew it taut like a railing. She caught it, knuckles white. Inch by inch she climbed, boots skidding on the glassy crust, and he stood off at her shoulder, not touching, just there. When she faltered, he set his boot as a brace she could step against. The wool rasped. Her teeth clicked loud in the cold. When she settled onto the sacks of salt, the horse sighed as if the world had shifted to something it recognized. Eli lifted the fallen knife from the snow, wiped it clean on a scrap, and slid it home. He looked once more at the wagon. Snow had started to sift into the scuffed places. The wind would smooth it all by evening. He reached across to the rail and measured the dents with his thumb. 3, brass ring. A man who liked the sound of his own habit. Eli tipped his hat back and let the brim shadow the glare. Sweetwater lay to the west, a dull plate under the gray. Somewhere out there, 3 men rode light, and one of them wore brass. "All right," he said to the horse, to the wind, to the girl under the scarf. "We're moving." The sled slid forward with a dry hiss. Behind them the wrecked wagon kept its silence. On its splintered rail the 3 little taps caught what light there was and held it like a mean thought. Windacre sat low in the draw, rock walls catching what little sun the day allowed. Smoke from the kitchen chimney ran thin and straight, the kind of cold that pins a line of steam to the sky and keeps it there. Eli eased the sled to the stoop. The bay shook his bridle and settled. "Zeke," Eli called, pushing the door with his boot. "Got company." Heat rolled out close and good. Old Zeke stood over a black pot, spoon steady as a metronome. Beans worked and popped under a skim of fat. Mutton tallow sweetened the room, with that woolly, comforting smell you only learn to love after long winters. A coffee pot chuffed on the back of the stove. Frost laced the inside of the window like cracked china. Zeke's beard was the color of dirty snow. His eyes took in the girls in one pass. Rope marks, the stiff way she held her shoulders, the scarf pulled low. He didn't crowd, he just tipped his spoon. "Beans'll set a soul upright." To Eli, "You bring in the rest of that salt?" Eli nodded toward the sacks. "Later." He kept his distance as he guided the girl to the bench beside the stove. "You take the warm side," he said, slow. "No one's reaching for you." He dragged a wool blanket from a peg and laid it across the bench, not over her, just there. She lowered herself like a person who had forgotten a chair could hold weight. Zeke put a tin cup down within arm's reach. "Coffee stout. I can cut it if she needs. Leave it," Eli said. He looked to the door as it swung, and Nora Finch stepped in, bringing a gust of hard air with her and a bundle wrapped in tow sack. Her cheeks were red as apples from the ride. "Brought that wool, I promised." She spotted Maggie, measured the room in a blink, and set the bundle by the hearth. "Name's Nora. Ain't here to pry." The girl's fingers crept for the coffee. She lifted, sipped, winced, then drank again, slower. Her breath evened, one notch at a time. Steam curled around her face. The scarf hid most of it, but her eyes came out of the cave a little. Eli pulled a chair across the floor with a small noise so it wouldn't startle her. "You can tell it in pieces," he said. You don't have to tie it to a single breath." She nodded, a short, jerky thing. "We were with the train," she said, "headed for Salt Lake. We had good mules." The words came like cold water over stones, clear, then gone. "3 men rode up. One smiled like he knew my name. He didn't." Her hands tightened around the cup. "Boss called Duke Minton. He wore a scarf with an M on it, backwards like a mirror mistake. He tapped a ring on things when he talked. Tick, tick, tick." Her mouth tried the sound and went flat. "Said I'd fetch more than a horse in the city." Zeke worked the spoon. The only sound was beans and breath. Nora's jaw set, but she stayed silent, a good kind of quiet. "They took the freight wagon," Maggie said. "They threw out the flour." "Left the Bible." She blinked once at that. "When a patrol pushed them 2 nights ago, Duke laughed. 'Got a badge in Laramie,' he said. 'He'll wink us through. Like law was just a curtain you pull back for your friends.'" Eli watched the stove iron bloom and fade with heat. "You hear a name?" She shook. "Only deputy? No face. They drove through the night. The next word stalled. She drew them up with care. "I asked for water." He tapped that ring on the wagon board. Tick, tick, tick. "Said I could drink when I learned to mind Nora's breath." Came out slow and sharp. "Lord love us," she said, and left it there. Zeke dipped a ladle and filled a tin bowl, set it where Maggie could reach, without flinching. "Hot," he warned. "Mind your lip." Outside, the dog broke into a sudden bay, long, accusing notes, slung at the leafless cottonwoods along the creek. Eli's head turned. Nora drifted to the window and used one finger to wipe a clear circle in the frost. "Wind," she said after a moment, but her voice weighed the word and found it light. Eli stood and crossed to the door. He opened it to a crack of cold so mean it bit the throat. The dog stood high-shouldered, nose cutting the air, tail straight. Nothing moved past the trees but the usual gray. Eli let the door ease shut. Maggie was speaking again, small and flat. He liked the sound of his ring. That tapping. He made it when he was pleased. He made it when he was about to do a thing. Her eyes slid to Eli's hands, then away. "You talk slow," she said, as if testing a fact. "Been talking to cattle most my life," he said. "No hurry in it." Nora stepped back from the window and toed the doormat straight. "I'll ride back for more wool come evening," she said, to no one in particular. "Keep that girl by the stone wall. Heat holds there." Zeke knelt a little to reach under the step, where kindling slivers gather. His fingers came up with a blackened stick, not much longer than a finger, smooth, round, the end burned hard. He turned it in his palm, squinted, a neat set of 3 short notches cut across the char. "What do you make of that?" Nora asked. Zeke held it to the light. "A chopstick from a Chinese cook set, looks like." He ran a thumb over the cuts. "Somebody's mark?" "Somebody wanted it found." He set it on the table, careful as a deed. 3 scars. Same as a brass ring might brag. The dog bayed again, closer this time, then fell to a growl and a whine, as if telling them the wind had company. Eli looked at the stick, then at the door, and felt the room tighten the way a hand closes around a hammer just before the swing. By noon the sky had settled into a hard pewter, the kind that presses sound down to the ground. Eli pulled his coat tight and went to walk the fence. Snow squeaked under his soles, a dry cry each step. The cottonwoods stood like ribs along the creek. He kept to a slow reading pace, eyes low, breath a steady fog. Behind him the dog worked a zigzag with its nose in the wind. From the kitchen stoop came the small, regular clack of old Zeke splitting kindling. Through the open door Eli heard Maggie count under her breath, soft, steady, learning to pull air all the way in, let it all the way out, then touched the coil of rope Zeke had laid on the table like it was a snake turned to straw. Her fingers landed and stayed a second longer, each try. Eli crouched at the first gate post and brushed snow off the ground with the side of his boot. A cartridge case lay half frozen there, dull brass gone to brown. He turned it in his glove. Someone had taken a nail or a knife point and scratched LAR into the base, letters mean and crooked. He thumbed his jaw and looked toward the road to the north, Laramie Way. He slipped the case into his pocket and went on. The drift behind the barn broke to a scuffed patch, men's heels cut deep and a horse's hock mark, where something had jolted sideways. He squatted, peeled back a mat of wind-swept snow, and found a chip of green wax pressed flat in the straw. He warmed it between his palms. A wolf's head rose up from the face when the light caught it, seal wax notched by grit. "Zeke," he called without raising his voice much. The old man came to the doorway, wiping his hands. "Findin' us trouble?" "Findin' its shadow." Eli held up the wax. Zeke blew through his mustache. "Ain't from any cowhand's kit I ever knew." Inside, Maggie's voice hiccuped to stillness. Eli set the wax in his vest and went to the corner where the barn made a lee from the wind. There the snow had drifted tall and then been sliced by a body slipping close. He could see the ghost of a scarf's tail stamped into the top, the weave done in bold yarn, the kind that would hold an M if a woman with a mean sense of humor had stitched it backward on purpose. Hoofbeats sounded on the road, the plain thud of a horse that didn't want to hurry. Eli rose and brushed his gloves, met the rider where the fence bent toward the lane. Deputy Tully Graves was a long piece of rawhide on a narrow bay, hat set low, collar up. A frost rime made a thin white line along his neckerchief. He tipped the brim at Zeke, at the dog at the kitchen door, where a shadow moved and went still. Again. "Mr. Hart!" Tully's voice came easy, but there was winter in it. "Sheriff sent me to lay eyes." "You're doing it." Eli stood with his thumbs in his belt, nothing in his hands. "We got sign." 3 riders, and a taste of Laramie Tully, swung down and crouched when Eli held out the cartridge. He grunted. "That's a poor joke to scratch on a primer." He straightened when Eli showed the green wax. The deputy turned it with care. "Wolf head. County office uses an eagle. City court runs scales. Wolf belongs to—" He let the rest burn off in the air. "Word is a badge up in Laramie. Runs dark some nights." Eli met his eyes. "Word is wind. Evidence is weight." "Fair," Tully said. He put the wax back in Eli's glove, not keeping it, not refusing it. He looked past Eli to the kitchen shadow. "The girl holdin' together?" "She's holdin'." Eli's tone made the 2 words enough. Tully pushed his hat back a finger's width. "Sheriff means to ride a circle this evening. If smoke shows, we'll see it." He tilted his head at the barn. "You want a man posted?" "Not yet." Eli nudged the dog with his boot and sent it to heel. "I keep the girl. You keep your word." The deputy studied him, whatever arithmetic he did happening behind his eyes. "I can keep that," he said at last. He touched the brim again. "You see anything you don't like, you?" "I light a lantern high, East Ridge." He laid 2 fingers on the fence rail, felt the cold. "And Eli, watch your leeward side. That's where a man fools himself first." He swung up and rode out the lane, horse throwing small, careful clumps of snow. Eli walked back along the barn's lee, slow as a man counting fence staples. He let the quiet talk to him. A faint rasp sounded where no rasp ought. Cloth on wood, the whisper of it. He stopped, body going still the way it had learned to before cattle broke a gate. He let his eyes roam without moving his head. There, between the stacked poles and the cistern, a sliver of color out of place. Wool, dark with a thread of red, the corner of a scarf pulled them tight around a jaw. For a blink the wind showed it whole. The backward M swung there like a crooked grin. A face with a cheekbone scar stayed in shadow. Then the scarf's tail snapped and the shape slid deeper into the seam where barn shadow becomes ground. Eli didn't call out. He felt the weight of the cartridge and the wolf seal in his vest pocket and knew what they meant. He shifted his stance so his right side faced the dark, left hand loose, voice flat as a sandbar. "Zeke," he said, not loud, never looking away. "Bring the dog inside and latch the kitchen door." From the doorway, Zeke made a noise that said he had heard. Inside, something small set down, careful on wood, the sound of a cup placed just so. The dog went silent. The scarf flicked once more, then was gone, eaten by the seam of shadow where men wait to measure your daylight. Eli let the stillness sit. The pewter sky pressed lower. Somewhere under it, brass tapped wood 3 times and smiled. The day flattened to a gray plate that gave back no light. Eli slid the barn door half shut to cut the draft, then heard a sound a man never forgets once he's learned it. Tick, 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 brass on wood. Not loud, confident. "Backside," he said, voice level, and stepped into the barn's lee. Duke Minton unpeeled from the shadow like ice calving off a ledge. He was spare and long in a dirty trail coat, jaw rough with 2 days' whisker, a backward M scarf knotted high at his throat. His right hand idled against the door jamb, brass ring tapping a lazy 3. Whiskey breath came off him in a cold bloom. "Afternoon, rancher." His smile showed a chip in a front tooth the color of old corn. "Wind carried your dog's voice clear to me. Wind carried something else, too." His eyes slid past Eli toward the kitchen wall, like a knife looking for a seam. Eli didn't turn his head. "You've had your look." Duke's ring ticked once more. "I left a claim on that freight, and a claim on what was in it." The kitchen latch muttered. Maggie stepped into the yard with an ash shovel in both hands, breath standing white, scarf off her face now. The rope burns on her wrists showed raw and straight. She planted her feet like she meant to hold the ground down. "Back inside," Eli said without looking at her. Duke's grin widened. "Well, look there." The goods grew legs. He moved quick then, quicker than his lazy talk, long arms shooting out to clamp her wrist. The shovel rang the stones and fell. The squeeze turned her knuckles white. "You belong to me," he told her, voice gone flat. Maggie's mouth set. "Don't." 1 syllable, hard as a nail. From the fence line came a dry woman's voice. "Take your hand off her, you flea-bit piece of winter." Nora Finch stood braced in the drifts, shotgun tucked to her shoulder, hat brim snow-crusted. She had the look of a person who'd already paid for this moment and kept the receipt. Eli's gun was still at his hip. He didn't need to clear leather yet. He lifted the hammer with his thumb until the sear sang. "Let her go." Duke didn't so much as blink. His ring tapped twice against Maggie's sleeve. Tick, tick, a habit he might not have known he had. "Trade you a notion," he said, smile thin. "You holster up, I walk the lady to my horse, and this place keeps its paint." Nora closed the bargain with thunder. Her right barrel tore the air, and buckshot shaved the crown off Duke's hat, flinging felt and snow in a dirty halo. Duke jerked the hand on Maggie's wrist, loosening by the space of a breath. That was room enough. She wrenched free and slid behind the stone wall, hands up like a boxer who'd learned in a hurry. Eli had the Colt out now, muzzle steady as fence line. "I said let her go," he repeated, lower than before. Duke measured the triangle, gun, woman, shotgun, then let the 3 taps fall again, soft as sin. Tick, tick, tick. He eased a step back, then another, palms raised, the backward M flashing red when the wind got under it. "You ranch folk don't favor business," he said, smile back in place but smaller. "Fine. I'll come by tonight with a better offer. Fire buys what money can't. Don't, Eli said. Duke's eyes permained at the dare. Bring your quench buckets, he said, and slid sideways into the seam of barn shadow, became smoke, then nothing. 10 heartbeats later, the dog found his bark again, too late to matter. Nora breathed out, broke her shotgun, and thumbed in a fresh shell. Man taps that ring like he's fixin' to hear himself in a church. She spat a chip of felt from her tongue. You see the way he pinched that girl, like she was rope? I've seen men cut cattle with less interest. Maggie came out from the wall slow, one hand gripping the other wrist, skin blanched where Duke's fingers had bit. She kept her eyes on Eli's hands, not the gun. You didn't touch me, she said, as if to count a fact she needed. No, Eli said. He set the Colt down on the sill where the cold could climb it. And I won't. Nora crouched where Duke had been and picked at a scrap half-iced under the jam. She teased it free and held it up, paper, stiff with cold, the corner sealed in green wax stamped with a wolf's head, scrawl cut across it in a hand that leaned too hard on its downstrokes. Warrant stayed. The lower edge showed the tail of a letter that might have been a D or an L. Nora let a low whistle roll out between her teeth. Law's handwriting or somebody playing dress-up. Eli took the shard without touching her glove, weighed it in his palm, and felt the shape of the night settle in behind the day. The sky held still. Snow whispered against the barn, soft and dry as flour. Somewhere out on the flats, a man with a brass ring smiled at his own echo. They left while the light still had some grip on the day. Eli saddled the bay in a squat sorrel for Maggie, cinches firm, blankets doubled on. Old Zeke stood in the doorway with his hat pushed back and a cup steaming in his hand. You take the east trail, he said. Drifts lay softer there. To Maggie he added, Stone Kitchen's the warm side when you come back. He made it a promise, more than a fact. The wind had not settled, it had sharpened. Snow came in powder sheets that ran along the ground like smoke, finding every seam in a man's clothes. The road to Red Butte went up out of the draw and across a high bench where nothing grew but grass heads snapped off clean by cold. Leather creaked. The sorrel's breath frosted Maggie's collar into stiff lace. Eli watched how she sat the saddle, tight at first, then looser as the horse's rhythm gave her something steady to lean against. That wasn't a wall. Keep your scarf up, he said. She did, nodding. The town was a clutch of low roofs, tucked against a cutbank. A tin star hung crooked over the sheriff's door, beaten out of a lard pail and shined by 100 storms. Heat met them inside, thick and iron-scented from a barrel stove. Sheriff Cole Bennett looked up from a ledger, big hands black at the creases, jaw set under a scrub of gray. A map of the county was tacked to the far wall with 3 knife points for pins. Meltwater ticked into a pan from the brim of his hat. Mr. Hart, he took in the girl, the rope burns, the way she kept one shoulder turned to the room. Miss, Eli set a green wax chip and the scratched cartridge on the desk. Found that at my place. There's more out on the drift. Bennett turned the wax with his thumb. The wolf head came up out of the light. He didn't curse. He didn't have to. The skin at the side of his eye did it for him. Man who stamped this eats warm, he said. He flipped the cartridge, read the crooked LARR, and put it down like it stung. If they come to fire your barn, we douse with lead. He stood, came around the desk, and faced Maggie, as if he were looking at a colt someone else had broken badly. Miss Hale, I can put you in a side room at the jail. Stove's good there. 2 cells between you and a door that locks. Safer than open country, Maggie's eyes flicked to Eli, and held there, not past him, not at the floor. Eli felt the ask in it and weighed what he knew. The road from Windacre to town was naked ground for a long stretch, a clean white board where any man could set his signature with a rifle. Bringing her in today had meant speed and luck both. Bringing her back tonight might ask for more luck than they had left. "Sheriff," Eli said, voice slow, "the kitchen at Windacre is stone. 2 small windows, iron latch. Water within 10 steps. If we ride the girl back through that naked cut, and a man lays on his belly with a long rifle, your cells won't matter. I'll hold the ranch and make that kitchen a safe room. You ride to me when you see my light." Bennett's eyes stayed on him long enough to sand down the edges. "You're choosing a fight on ground, you know." He glanced at the map, then at the window where a slab of daylight had gone the color of pewter. "All right. I'll post a man on the east ridge where he can see your place breathe." He turned and reached to a shelf, came back with a short flare pistol and a box of green stars. "1 of these means we come hard. 2 means we come hungry." He set them in Eli's hand. "You got water? Buckets to fill? Fill 'em now. Split the straw and move half to the far side of the lot. Wet a ring of ash around the barn, if you can scrounge it. You'll need it." He looked at Maggie again. "Miss Hale, if he says the kitchen, you mind him. If he says the floor, you put your belly to it and don't think about pride." Maggie nodded once. "Yes, sir." A knock on the jamb, and Deputy Tully Graves leaned in, snow jeweling his hat brim. "Ridge'll hold," he said, answering an order he hadn't heard. To Eli, "I'll take the east seat and stay thin. You light a lantern high if you want me sooner." Bennett's mouth ticked at one corner, the closest he came to a smile. "Boy's got a spine. He's got a choice," Eli said. "We all do," Bennett answered. "Wayne." They left with the day failing fast. Tully rode with them for a mile, then angled off up a gully, the bay climbing like a goat where the snow had blown thin. He lifted 2 fingers without looking back, and was gone among the cuts and sage. Maggie rode steady now. Once she said, almost to herself, "Stone holds heat longer." "It does," Eli said, "and it don't burn easy." They dropped into the draw and felt the wind drop with them. Windacre showed as a dark seam under the white. The dog bulleting from the yard told them Zeke had kept the door unlatched for the living. Smoke ran low from the kitchen stovepipe, a good sign. Eli swung down and took Maggie's reins. "Inside," he said, "straight to the wall. Zeke, fill every bucket you can stand." Zeke's voice came from the kitchen, already moving. "Been fillin' since you left, Eli turned for the barn and stopped. On the nearest fence rail, waist high and plain as a man's name, lay 3 fresh dents where brass had tapped wood. The edges of each were wet dark, not yet skinned over by cold. The spacing was exact, a little song written in pine. He laid his gloved thumb across them, still warm from the friction. The tapping had been done in the last hour, which meant while they were collecting law and green stars, the man with the ring had stood right here and measured the ranch the way a buyer eyes a horse's teeth. "They're ahead of us," Eli said to the fence, to the dog, to the slope where the east ridge began. He slid the flare pistol into his belt and felt the weight of it. The sky in the west had gone to slate. Somewhere under that lid, a man smiled and waited on dark. Afternoon thinned to a pewter that made every nail look darker. They worked to put a skin on the place. Eli and old Zeke dragged 2 ash tubs from under the stove and carried them to the yard. They mixed the gray with meltwater till it went to slurry, then ringed the barn, a dull wet ribbon where sparks would die. Zeke's breath rattled. The old man wouldn't say he was winded, so Eli didn't ask. "Buckets," Eli said. They filled anything that would hold water, milk pans, maple syrup kettles left from a sweeter year, 2 lard tins with the labels gone. Eli set them at the 4 corners like sentries. He ran a bell wire from the north gate to the porch post. thin copper tied to little tongues he'd cut from spent cartridges. A touch would make them tingle like nervous teeth. "Round count," he said. Zeke checked his old Henry by touch, murmuring, 14 in, 1 ride, the way some men say prayers. Eli thumbed his Colt and the Winchester both. He set a flare pistol high on the mantel where his hand would find it blind. Maggie stood by the table, sleeves pushed to her elbows, wrists mapped with the rope's old fire. Zeke had laid out clean muslin strips and a jar of coal oil for the scissors. Eli showed her wrap slow, under, cross, over, firm enough to hold, loose enough not to bite. Her hands learned in 3 tries. On the 4th, they didn't shake. "You'll do fine," he said. She nodded once, then again, at her own pace. He took her outside, to the lee of the kitchen, where the wind died. A tin pan sat half full with wet sand, where snow had melted and run off the warm stone. "These wicks," he said, holding up a torch made of twisted rag and tallow. "They burn from the mouth." He lit it, a mean orange. "Don't fight the fire. Smother the breath." He flicked it toward her. She moved. Not back but in, brought the pan up and threw hard, a flat shovel of wet grit right into the burning mouth. The light snuffed with a sound like a throat cleared. She looked at the dark bundle, then at him, waiting for a measure that wasn't pity. He gave her a small, dry thing instead. Again. They did it until the smell of scorched rag rode the kitchen wall and her shoulders were a line, not a knot. When they were through, he put a small knife in her palm, bone-handled, honed thin. "It's for bushings and feed sacks," he said, "because some tools are easier to hold when they have chores, and for whatever else your hand says." Her fingers closed, not tight, decided. Light went duller. The dog worked the near yard, tail stiff, muzzle testing the cut between barn and house. From the corrals came a scrape where no stock moved. Eli raised a hand. Zeke's Henry tilted toward the sound. The scout showed himself the way a mistake does, too quick across open ground, then a stumble. A young man, hat rim iced, the left leg dragging. He had a poncha, pistol, and a fire stick tucked in his belt. The tallow wick wrapped in cloth to keep the wind off. He pitched at the corner of the straw shed, caught himself with his bad knee, and bit a curse you could smell the whiskey in. Zeke's cheek welded to the rifle stock. "I got him," he said, gravel quiet. "One less match in the world." "Hold," Eli said. The kid looked up, saw the rifle, and tried to lift his pistol. The leg wouldn't take it. He went down on a hand, came up with his palm bloody from an old cut split new. "Drop it," Eli called. "Stick all of it." His voice wasn't big. It didn't need to be. The boy stared like he couldn't fit this version of the world into his head. Then the pistol clattered onto the crust. The torch's wick showed a green smear where some fool had pressed it into a seal pot, maybe to keep it straight while it set. The boy's eyes flicked to Maggie, one quick, ugly measure, and then to Zeke's muzzle. Zeke's breath whistled once. "He ain't worth a winner," the old man said. The Henry's front sight settled, steady as a nail. He had the kind of aim that ends arguments. Eli stepped and put 2 fingers on the barrel, pushed it down an inch. "No." "Eli," Zeke said, like a man reminding another what the world usually pays. "Justice first, not vengeance," Eli said, eyes not leaving the boy. "Mercy stands guard here. We'll hand him to the badge and see if the law's got a backbone left." The boy swallowed. Something uncoiled in Maggie's shoulders that hadn't moved since the trail. Not forgiveness, just a slack where the rope had been. "Get up," Eli told the scout. "Leave the stick." "Duke'll skin me if I—" the boy started. "Duke'll have to find you," Eli said. "He won't, not tonight." He walked the kid backward to the outer fence. not touching him, just herding with his voice, the way you'd ease a spooked yearling. At the gap, he said, "Go." The boy went, half run, half hop, jacket flapping like a torn flag, until the drifts took him and made him small. Zeke spat into the snow where the boy had stood. "Oughta marked him so the coyotes could count him later." "We marked him," Eli said. He looked at the torch wick on the ground, that wolf-green smear, and kicked it into the ash ring. "He knows we kept him standing. He'll carry it." They worked the last of the chores with the care of men who have already seen the fire once in their lives. Zeke packed the stove and spread ash under the north eave until the ground looked like an old man's beard. Maggie checked the bell wire with 2 fingers, learned its voice. Bright when a gate moved, dull when the wind tried to lie. Inside, Eli set the green flares on the mantel, then took one down and pocketed it. The lantern on the ridgepole got a new wick and a clean chimney. He showed Maggie how the dipper sat by the buckets, handle always facing the same way in the dark, little order against a big night. When they stepped out again, the day had gone from pewter to slate. The wind had gone still, the way a dog goes silent right before it decides. Sound carried too well. The dog pricked and stared at the north gate, not barking, listening. Then the bell wire quivered, just a tremble, a high, fine chime from 2 brass tongues that did not belong to any breeze. It ran along the copper and into the posts and into the bones of the house, and Eli felt it in his teeth. "Someone's testing us," Zeke said. "Good," Eli answered, because a clean question deserved a clean answer. He lifted his head and smelled the night like a man checks the wind before he shoots. "Let him learn our names." Night fell like a lid. The wind, which had held its breath all afternoon, let it out in a thin hiss that carried far. Then the dark grew teeth. A torch arced over the north fence, a slow orange comet that found straw and took. Fire crawled fast where the wind fed it, a greedy yellow with a blue heart. The ash ring shivered and blackened the first tongues, but the second wave cleared it. Another torch, then a third, thrown long and true. "Buckets!" Eli's voice ran short and flat. Old Zeke was already moving, shoulders hunched, boots cutting half-moons into the crust. He heaved a lard tin at the fire's mouth. It hissed. Steam punched the air. The dog went mad then, a drum of bark that stuttered and held. From out beyond the yard came a man's hoot, mean and high, answering the dog with laughter. The first shot snapped, small hard cracks that smacked wood and kicked splinters. Eli felt daylight open in the barn wall behind his ear. He slid, brought the Winchester to his shoulder, and took the silhouette that rose at the straw stack edge. The man folded with both arms up as if reaching for a saddle that wasn't there. Later Eli would know it was Rafe Linder. Now it was only a shape going down. Return fire stung him, a hot, glancing burn along the meat of his shoulder that knocked him to a knee without taking his arm. The cold took the sting down to something he could use. He rolled, pressed the bad side to the snow to bleed the heat out, then came back up behind the corner post. "Gate!" he barked. Zeke broke for the pen latch and loosed the herd into the open snow where their bodies would not make tinder. Cattle blue and bald, black backs steaming, hooves scrabbling for clean ground. A boom answered from the fence line, Nora Finch's shotgun speaking once and then again from a shadowed notch. Her voice came with it. A dry oath the wind tore in half. Maggie stood at the kitchen's lee, small against the stone, wet sand pan at her feet, salt barrel shouldered against the door's draft, like a plug in a hole. The first time the straw caught near the stone, she went straight to it, no turn, no stutter, and shoved the barrel hard so the wind died in that corner. The flames starved an inch, then 2. "Good," Eli said, not looking at her, sighting instead on a muzzle flash that popped where the corral rails bent. The Winchester coughed, wood chips sang, A dark shape vaulted the low gate and came on, long coat kicking sparks. Duke Minton in his backward M scarf, the brass ring bright in his fist. "Evenin', rancher," he called, cheerful as a man tipping a hat. "I brung my money." He lifted a torch and showed it like an IOU paid in full. He didn't expect the girl. Maggie stepped into him from a side angle, the way you step to a horse's shoulder so it can't strike or bite. She threw the wet sand up into the burning mouth of the torch, not at the flame's pretty length, but at its breath. The fire snuffed with a cough, and a stink of hot tallow. Duke's head rocked half an inch, surprised into honesty. For a heartbeat the yard fell into a cold quiet, big enough to hear men breathing. Then somebody yelled, and a bullet chewed splinters out of the kitchen lintel, and the night broke again. Duke lunged, not at Eli, at Maggie, and the ring tapped the door jamb, tick, 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 without him knowing it. That same little brag he carried like a pocket song. Maggie saw his chest, his hips, the reach of his arm. She didn't back. She reached with her left, found the stove poker where Zeke had leaned it, and brought it up the way Eli had shown her to hold a post-hole digger, hands apart, point steady. "Don't," she said, and the word had no tremor in it. He grinned with all his teeth. "You don't give orders, girl." Eli's shoulder burned. He put a round into the ground at Duke's feet, a warning aimed at the part of a man's brain that still counts. "That's far enough." Duke walked right through the warning, lazy as a cat, and threw the dead torch aside. He had a knife in his left now, short and black with winter. "He ain't got but one good arm tonight," he told Maggie, eyes on hers, never minding Eli. "You." He reached. Maggie slid one boot half back and found the stone with her heel, and set. The poker wasn't heavy. It didn't need to be. It needed to be true. She held the line the way she'd held the breath in Zeke's kitchen, all the way in, all the way out, nothing left to spare for shaking. Behind Duke, on the far side of the snow glare, a man popped up to take a shot, and Nora knocked his hat into the next county. Cattle shouldered through the yard like dark rivers. Zeke's Henry ticked an even count, each shot a nail in a board laid straight. Duke's hand came down on Maggie's shoulder, skin on cloth, the very thinnest thing that had once sent her body into pieces. It landed hard, claimed her like a rope. She didn't flinch. She drove the point. The steel in Maggie's shove carried true. The poker punched cloth and rib, turned Duke sideways. He snarled, knife flashing a short arc. Eli's bad shoulder lit again, and he put a round low, forcing Duke to hop back or take it in the knee. The yard went to a braid of noise. Shot, ball, crackle, until Eli made a choice and snapped the flare pistol up. The green star tore the night open. It rose clean, hissed, and hung there, painting the snow a sickly meadow color. Shadows ran for cover and lost the race. From the east ridge came the sound the place had been waiting on. Hoofbeats, many, the ground drumming a promise. Sheriff Cole Bennett dropped in first, coat blown wide, hat clamped to his skull like it grew there. 3 men shouldered him, muzzles steady, mouths shut. Their horses came hard and square, not pretty, workhorses that ate miles and gave them back as courage. "Down!" Bennett barked at no one and everyone, and the yard obeyed. His rifle spoke once, a dry crack that clipped the lamp of a man trying to crawl the fence. That man rolled over and chose to stay where he'd landed. Eli felt the air shift, the way it does when a big bull decides not to break. Duke felt it too. He feinted at Maggie to keep his brag, then spun to run the thin seam between barn and snowbank where a good man with a bad arm might not follow. He met Tully Graves instead. The deputy's bay came crosswise like a gate slamming shut. Tully threw himself out of the saddle before the horse had finished stopping, hit Duke square, and they went into the snow together. 2 bodies, 1 purpose. Duke's knife skittered and vanished. Tully took a punch that would have settled a weaker man. He rode it, kept his hands where they needed to be, and levered Duke's arm to the bad side with a twist that made the ring hand go numb. "Iron," Tully said to the nearest rider without looking up. The man tossed him the cuffs. Iron snapped with a sound like a door finally closing. Duke tried to arch and failed. The backward M-scarf lay trampled, red against churned white. "Done?" Tully said, breath hard, cheeks burning with cold, and something like anger refusing to boil over. He put a knee between Duke's shoulders and looked across the yard for Eli. "You upright?" "Enough," Eli said, voice thin but there. He had the Winchester down, the smoke from its last shot curling. Maggie stood behind the stone, poker still set, eyes huge and bright but steady. Zeke, in the doorway, leveled the Henry over the lintel like a Sunday rule. The fight ran out of the place one man at a time. A hat blew, a horse blew harder, and then there was only the hiss of wet straw and the popping talk of lumber cooling after flame. Bennett swung down, crossed the churn, and put a hand on Eli's good arm, a short, solid thing that belonged to men who understood the same ledger. He pointed with his chin at Duke. "That him?" "That's him," Eli said. He felt more tired than hurt. "Bag their trash," Bennett told his riders. "No fires left standing. Count the living twice. Count the dead once." He turned to Tully. "Search him." Full. Tully knelt and worked Duke like a man unwrapping a lie. From an inside pocket he drew a paper stiff as tin from cold. The corner wore green wax with a wolf's head pressed clean. The writing went downhill, ink blotted where a hand had leaned hard. Across the face ran two words used like a hammer: warrant stayed. Beneath it a signature sprawled, clear enough on the first name to read deputy, the last line starting with an L and leaving the rest to the cold. Tully held it to Bennett. "Came out of his coat, Sheriff." Bennett didn't take it right off. He looked at it like a man looks at a snake in his flour bin. Then he gripped the corner that was only paper, not seal, and studied what the color and weight wanted to say. "Somebody in Laramie eats warm and sleeps soft," he said. "No heat in it, just a measure." Duke rolled his cheek to the snow and grinned up through chapped lips. "Told you." Wink and a pass, boys. Tully's jaw worked once. He didn't look at Duke when he answered. He looked at Eli. "I'm standing here." "Simple as putting your name to a page." Eli nodded, the kind of nod that spends something and gets something back. "If law won't stand," he said, voice at the ground, "we'll set it up right." Bennett tucked the paper away where it would not get lost or dirty and where it would not outleave his body until a judge saw it. He lifted a hand and men moved again, ropes, buckets, a shovel laid straight. He sent one rider to fetch the stray cattle back in from the dark edge and another to walk the fence with Zeke. The place breathed. Maggie came out from the stone in 3 small steps and put the poker's end down. Her eyes were on the cuffs, not the man in them. She flexed the hand Duke had grabbed and let it hang by her side. Bennett looked at her in a way respectful, then nodded at Zeke. "Keep the girl on the warm side. We're not through with nights yet." They took Duke up between 2 horses, not gentle and not cruel, and started him for the lane. Snow had begun to fall again, fine as sawdust. No wind, just weight. Men's breath made brief tents in the dark. Eli tilted his face to the ridge to make sure the green star's smoke had blown itself out. On the far rise, beyond the last of the sheriff's riders, a lone figure sat motionless on a narrow horse, hat low, shoulders easy, in a way that said distance was the safest weapon tonight. The horse turned and the rider led it, no hurry in him at all. He wheeled once to look back, then slid off the skyline and was gone toward Laramie without breaking the crust. Dawn came gray and used up, the kind of light that doesn't so much arrive as quit arguing with the dark. Smoke lay in low seams along the yard. The barn stood, half-burned, eaves scalloped black, boards puckered. Snow around it had gone to a crusted slag where heat met cold and lost. They counted what breathed. Cattle huddled in the open, backs smoking, heads low. Old Zeke moved through them with a stick, touching flanks, cussing gentle. "On your feet, you old sinners," he said like a blessing. The dog worked a slow figure eight, tongue out, too tired to brag. Inside the stone kitchen, the air held three smells: smoke, boiled coffee, and the sharp bite of carbolic. Eli sat on a chair, turned backward, shirt off one shoulder. Zeke's hands were steady with the roll of muslin, drawing it firm under Eli's arm and back again. The graze had taken a mean bite, not deep. It hurt like a truth told plain. Maggie stood with the basin. She pinched a cloth through the brown bottle, wrung it, and touched the edge of the wound, like she was tracing a map she meant to learn once and keep. Her hands were steady now. When Eli flinched, she didn't apologize. She sat and held, eyes on the work, jaw soft but sure. "That's enough," Zeke said, "else we'll bandage him clear to Cheyenne." He tied a square knot, flat and neat. Eli rolled the shoulder once, found the good and the bad of it. "Thank you," he said. Maggie nodded. "You said Mercy stands guard here," she answered, not looking up from the last tuck of cloth. "Somebody has to make sure it knows where to stand." Zeke snorted, pleased in his own bent way, and went to the stove. He poured coffee black as a mine and set a cup by each of their hands, then drew out a nail and tapped it into the stone mortar by the mantel. He lifted the stiff scrap of paper with its green wolf-head wax, studied it the way a man reads weather, and pinned it to the blunt, where the heat would not curl it, and the smoke would not hide it. "There," he said, "so we don't forget who eats warm." They stepped back into the yard. Sheriff Bennett had his men mounted, faces raw with wind and work. They'd dragged the worst of the straw to clean snow and beat out live coals. Someone had mended a gap with a gate laid sideways. Bennett touched his hat brim to Eli, and then to Maggie. "We'll haul your prisoner while the track's tight," he said. "Judge'll hear tell of that paper before the noon fire." He looked at Tully. "You walk nights here till I say different." Deputy Tully Graves slid a glance at the half-burned gable and then at the kitchen door. "I'll take the east side," he said. "Ridge shows more than men like." Bennett turned his horse with his knees. "No show in it. Count the living twice," he told Zeke again. And then the riders went, hoofs whispering on the hard skin of snow, until the draw swallowed them. Work came back, the small kind that makes a place livable after big work tried to end it. Eli cut short stove wood, 3 lengths palm wide, so Maggie wouldn't have to lever heavy splits with a sore wrist. Each billet clicked tidy in the wood box. He lifted the salt barrel off the door and reset it by the wall. He swept grit away from the stone threshold with the flat of his hand, liking the feel of it going smooth under his palm. The shoulder, burned, asked him to stop. He didn't. Maggie took the wet coats, wrung what water they had picked up, and hung them near the stove with space between so the heat could move. She checked the bell wire with a finger and smiled. The smallest thing, when it sang back in bright metal. Outside, she carried a pan of warm mash to the old cow who'd taken a scorch along the flank. The cow nosed her hip, grateful and greedy, the world's ugliest thank you. Inside again the quiet breathed. They didn't crowd it. Eli sat, not because he needed to, but because the chair was there, and the room asked nothing more. After a while he stood and lifted a blanket off the peg. He stepped to the door and held it out. Maggie looked at the wool, then at him. For a long second the old habit moved in her, the reach, the recoil. It passed like a shadow. She took the blanket and wrapped it to her, not shrinking from his nearness, not forcing any brave, just taking it like a tool, like heat. "Thank you," she said. The words had more gravel in them now, less wind. Zeke doled beans into bowls. The 3 of them ate standing, spoons clicking the tin, the way people do when chairs are for later. Tully came to the door edge and tapped once with a knuckle. "Holler if that wire sings," he said. "It sings. We'll raise you a hymn," Zeke told him. Afternoon leaned. Cloud sat low and level. The half-burned barn threw a stubby shadow into the yard like a sundial that had lost its pride. Eli stepped out to the porch, cup in hand, and let the coffee's heat walk back into his fingers. Maggie joined him, blanket tight, face open to the air as if the cold were a thing to learn, not fear. On the far edge of the pasture, just beyond the last run of fence posts where the snow drifted deep and then flattened, a shape moved, slow, deliberate, not a cow, not a coyote, a lone rider on a narrow horse. The figure sat easy, hat brim low, shoulders loose, the way a man rides when he wants you to see him but not know him. He didn't come on, he didn't turn away. The rider swung down, he bent and set something on the ground where fence met wind, 3 fist stones stacked careful, one atop the other, a small cairn the color of old bone against the white. He stood back as if to judge his own work, tipped his hat to the ranch in a gesture that was half mockery and half funeral, then swung up again and went, not hurrying, cutting a clean track toward the open country Laramie way. Maggie's hand found the door jamb. Eli watched the cairn until his eyes watered from the cold. He didn't say what it meant. He didn't need to. The stones said it plain enough. We see you, we remember, we'll come back knowing the way. By afternoon, the sky, Bishima lifted a shade, as if the day had decided to try again. The posse was a smear on the far road. Duke hunched between 2 saddles like a bundle no one wanted to carry. The lane took them toward Red Butte and on to a judge who would have to look at Wolf Green Wax and choose what kind of man he was in public. Windacre steadied. The herd drifted back to their chewed patches, heads down, steam hanging. The barn wore its black scallop like a scar that would talk in certain weather and keep shut in others. Zeke banged a bent hinge straight on the anvil and fit it back to the door with square nails he'd saved for no good reason until now. Knew they'd earn daylight, he said. Inside the stone kitchen, the heat had a clean edge. Maggie moved in it the way folks do when a room is theirs. No flinch at the door, no counting windows for exits. She set bean soup to simmer and skimmed it once, twice with Zeke's big spoon, the motion slow and exact. Eli brought in a wet coat, heavy with melt, and laid it on the chair. They kept by the stove for such things. He turned it once so the seam would dry even and not twist. They ate without hurry. Zeke told a small story about a winter when flour had tasted like stove bolts, and how he'd learned to keep coffee in a tobacco tin so the damp couldn't boss it around. Maggie smiled at the part where the tin burst and peppered him black in the face. It wasn't a big smile. It was hers. When the bowls were clean, Eli lifted the scrap of paper from the nail, looked at the green wolf that had thought itself important, and set it back where it could keep its shame. He stood by the door with his hat brim in his fingers, not fidgeting, measuring. "You said last night," Maggie began, then stopped. She tucked a loose strand of hair under the scarf she wore for warmth, not for hiding. "About Mercy," Eli nodded. "I meant it." He took a breath that made his shoulder complain. "Guns have their job, so do fences, but Mercy keeps this ground quieter than any gun. It holds a line no bullet can measure." He glanced at the chair with the coat. "It tells a man what kind of mark he leaves when he's done." She weighed it like a tool in her palm. "Mercy isn't soft," she said. "No," he answered. "It's work. Same as calving by lantern, same as riding out when the sky says stay home. It costs, but it leaves the place fit to sleep in." The bell wire pinged once, just the wind reminding them it had votes. Deputy Tully Graves passed the porch slow. A few minutes later, horse muffled, hat low. He lifted 2 fingers and kept on, the long figure of a promise walking the cold. Zeke grunted, satisfied. Boys keeping nights honest. Eli stepped out with a broom and swept the threshold, a habit his wife had kept that he'd never thought much of until he lost it and then found its right weight. Maggie took the broom when he paused and finished the sweep with short, sure strokes, pushing ash and grit into a neat line that the wind could carry away on fair terms. They didn't speak over it. The sound of straw bristles on stone was talk enough. Evening picked its way down the draw. The cairn of 3 stones sat where the fence met them up. Open. It had gathered a small hat of snow now, like a bad idea trying to look innocent. Maggie looked at it once and then at Eli. He nodded. "We'll leave it," he said. "Ain't our job to pretend it wasn't set." They lit the lamp early. Zeke tuned the wick with a thumbnail until the flame made a round island with no smoke. He found the old Bible the thieves had tossed and laid it spine up on the mantel, not to preach at anybody, just to put weight on the side of the ledger he liked. After a time, Eli said, "Tomorrow I'll cut new rails. We'll set a post where the gable burned short. We'll borrow a team from Nora for the pull." He rubbed his shoulder once. "Work'll go easier if you tell me when I'm being foolish." Maggie folded the blanket around her tighter, not as a shield, but as warmth earned. "I can do that," she said. She tilted her head toward the nail, where the warrant hung. "And when the judge reads that, if the room goes quiet in the wrong way, we'll raise it loud in the right one," Eli said. "Sheriff first. Then whatever comes, we don't drag you through those doors till the ground's worth steppin' on." Silence held them kindly then. Outside a cow coughed. The stove ticked as iron settled. The lamp thread hummed. Zeke snored once in his chair and woke himself, gave a guilty look, then did it again on purpose to make them smile. He failed and smiled anyway. Before they banked the fire, Eli stood with a hand on the warm stone and looked at the door, at the place where Duke's hand had landed, and where Maggie had not broken. He let the moment tell itself. Then he spoke not to her exactly, not to the room, maybe to the part of himself that had needed the words said plain. "Snow hides hoof marks. Can a heart hide fear when we set mercy on watch, too?" Maggie's answer was a nod a person could lean on. "It can learn where to set its feet," she said. Zeke blew the lamp to a red bead and capped it with a coin of glass. The kitchen went to a low glow that made the room look older and truer. Eli checked the green stars one last time and slid the bolt. Maggie shuffled the bowls so they'd be ready for morning hands. The night came on without malice, only cold, and the small noises of a place that meant to stand upright. If this warmed your hands, neighbor, you know where the stove is. Stay a while. We'll keep the coffee on and the lantern trimmed for the next trail we have to ride. Some nights on the high plains end in ash and quiet hands. Windacre still stands, scarred, upright, warmed by small work, a coat turned by the stove, a bowl of beans shared, a bell wire straight. Maybe that's the point. Mercy isn't soft. It's work that lets a place sleep without a gun in its teeth. If the trail we rode tonight warmed your hands, talk to me down below. Comment 0 if the green flare stuck with you. Comment 1 if you felt mercy standing guard. And if you want more roads like this, snow, iron, and a little light, hit subscribe and ride with us on the next story. The lantern's trimmed, the coffee's on.